Attention, please. Attention, please. We are investigating an alarm condition. Please await further announcements.
And had a nice little text chat with Steve Wang a little while ago. Today is his birthday.
Oh wow! Oh, happy birthday, Steve Wang! That's awesome.
So I wished Steve a happy birthday, and we chatted for a little bit.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah, and he's doing well. You know, all things considered in the state of the world.
Yeah, it's a
crazy world we're living on. It's kind of like stop the world. I want to get off.
Yeah, it's a bumpy road. You need good suspension to deal with it.
For sure.
Yeah, no, it is tricky. I've been using my Cintiq this week, so I've been using this little headstand thing you want me to put my pen in. This is quite cool.
Nice. I sent one to Maddie Spencer also. I hope she's gotten. I haven't heard from her. I know she's crazy busy.
Yeah, I bet she is.
But if you got yours, I'm sure she got hers.
Yeah,
so
she must have.
So
very cool.
I hope she's getting some use out of it. Also, send her the little conjoined fetal skulls that I think I.
I think she'll love that.
When I was over there, it seems to fit right in with her sensibilities.
Yeah.
And her menagerie of weirdness.
Well, you know, in a world where so much communication is done online and there's so much virtual stuff and people reading ebooks and blah, 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 it's nice to know that there are still people that appreciate the tactile thing. And that's the whole thing about making stuff, isn't it? It's the tactile sensation of things.
Yeah, well, that's, I've said it before, it's the whole reason I switched from visual effects to practical effects is because I'm a tactile person. And I think most visual artists are, in one way or another, tactile people. You know, you like the feel of the media that you're working on, whether it's charcoal or acrylic paints or even doing digital things. You know, you're still holding the stylus and you're physically moving your hand to create the artwork, even though it's not a physical art piece. It's still something that you're doing with your hands.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting actually. There's that was something I wanted to talk about before we get onto our part one of our interview for this episode. There was a message came up on one of the forums about whether sculpting digitally was still sculpting, because obviously sculpting is typically maneuvering materials by hand in a physical world, because that's all that was available, and now obviously
it's very definitely sculpting. It's not programming. I mean, programming allows you to sculpt digitally, but the act itself is not programming. You're not typing zeros and ones.
No, yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because like my argument with it is, like, if you write a novel and you type it, is it any less a novel because you didn't write it with a biro on a legal pad, or
right, or with a quill dipped in blood?
But that's precisely the point, I think, because over time the act of writing has changed. You went from scratching in dirt to making clay tablets to papyrus to, vellum, whatever, stretched skin to paper to digital. It's a kind of a natural progression, and at every stage the act of writing has always been coming up with plots and all that kind of stuff, and it gets easier if you can type stuff up, but that doesn't relieve you of your responsibility as a writer to write.
Sure. I remember when the IBM Selectric typewriter came out with the little ball with all the letters on it,
punch the paper,
spins around and it automatically will correct mistyped letters.
At this point, I just want to play the sound of that very typewriter working away, because it's pretty awesome.
I'm sure there are people going,
"What are you talking about?
What's an IBM Selectric? What's a typewriter?"
Yeah, but yeah.
So you need to make copies. You used carbon paper,
and there was some charm in that. But I really like the fact that I can type stuff in Word and print it, and if I want to change something, I don't have to write the whole document again. I can just tweak it.
Oh yeah, it's certainly made, from my point of view, for writing a book, it's certainly made the editing process easier, because you can put these review tabs and you can track your changes so you know what's new and what you're deleting, and you can make comments. It's made the editing process so much easier.
Yeah.
It's still a pain in the ass, but it's a whole lot easier than I imagine it was, 75 years ago.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. But I think with the sculpting thing, it's interesting because I still enjoy the tactile sensation of things. But I have to say, in the last year or so, certainly, I've started using ZBrush more for certain things and printing things more, but in a way that they're still being used with physical objects. It's only part of the process for me. My job doesn't stop and start with that. It's just a means to get to an end. And I've been exploring the conflicted feelings I have around that sensation, having been so resistant to using digital stuff for so long because I couldn't use ZBrush properly and I didn't have a printer and all this kind of stuff. And over the last few years,
I'm in the same boat. But I'm in the same boat that way. But I don't think now that with the advent of scanner technology getting better and better and prices dropping similar to the way 3D printers were just a few years ago, I don't think the ability to digitally scan an actor's head and print out a core on a resin printer that you modified in ZBrush is going to take the place of physically life casting with silicone or alginate anytime in the foreseeable future.
I don't know.
I mean, maybe
it might do, but this is the issue I have. If you're doing a life cast with silicone, no one would say, "Oh, you're cheating. You should be using moulage."
How hygienic.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like, but that's how we used to do it, and things change. And I think it's a difficult one when new things come along, especially if an industry adopts processes a certain way and you don't. I've heard this from a fair few people. But what I think that the conversation I had with Sangeet a few years back, something that he said that really stuck with me was to not deify the process. So how prosthetics are made. There are we love the way that things have been done in the past, and obviously the people like Dick Smith and Gordon Smith, and they've developed processes and materials and techniques that we use all the time. But if you hold them in such high esteem that you don't do anything new yourself because you're just doing what has been shown to you in the past, that's very limiting. Right. That's very limiting, especially if there are young whippersnappers coming up who use these things without that luggage. They don't have. I think
it's the same across many industries. There are woodworkers who relish the old school ways of doing tongue and groove and doing things the way the pioneers did to create fine furniture that is, unquestionably spectacular when you see some of the finished pieces done using these ancient methods. But that doesn't, I think, take anything away from tools like the shaper or CNC machines where you can cut out and do these precise things with technology instead of old school hand tools. The end result is the same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is certainly the ability to be able to do that is an important skill. But if you're competing with, if you're repairing something or fixing something that needs that, that's good. But if you're mass producing something and that's your living, you're not going to be able to make enough quick enough if everybody else is using CNC machines.
Right.
So by definition, you'll just get run out of town. So you have to adapt or die. But at the same time,
but it's not one way or the other.
No, exactly that. It's more a case that it's using both. It's like, for me, using ZBrush and printing things just allows me to do more sophisticated sculpts and better stuff, basically, with what I know.
Yeah, and the more you use it, the better you get at it, and you can, like we've talked about, using ZBrush and layers to mock up ideas for different character makeups. Using ZBrush and layers in the same amount of, 4 or 5 different ones
Yeah.
in the same amount of time it would take you to use it pushing clay around on a life cast.
Yes, yeah. And I
You know,
mean,
it comes down to working smart, not hard. Yeah, and the learning curve aside from the amount of time and effort it takes you to get to a level where you can do that.
yes, but that is actually not as
That
much
happens
as you
with
think.
anything. If you've never used a hammer and tried to pound a nail into a piece of wood,
Yeah.
you're probably going to lose a thumbnail or two trying to get really good at pounding a nail and hitting it once and it's done.
Well, that's true. I mean, yeah. I mean, those manual skills, those hand-eye coordination skills, they're just as hard earned. But there's nothing wrong with knowing those and also having a screwdriver and a power drill in your toolkit for when it's necessary to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a tricky one, but I've definitely noticed that you are working now as well in an industry where that is the norm in a lot of areas. So times that you have to work on things have shortened essentially in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the means to thrash out 5 or 6 designs digitally in order to burn out all the ones you're not going to need and get to the one you will so you can start sculpting, then you're stuck with just sculpting them manually at greater cost and greater time
a
commitment.
a lot of it has to deal with budgetary constraints.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's all very different. It's an interesting one. So I think for all of that, I think it's kind of inevitable that that's going to come in. It's just whether or not we think that's still sculpting. But I guess that depends on your definition of what you think sculpting is. Because in the past, sculpting has been one thing. But that's because that was all that was available. If Michelangelo had a fucking Cintiq, you bet your bottom dollar would have fucking used it. But
Yeah, or if he'd had a Dremel.
Exactly. So just give it another 300 years and no one will be thinking about it. Like, you think about the word driving. That was presumably originally for driving horses or driving a chariot.
Mm-hmm.
And now that refers to driving a car. You don't have to specify that it is a car you're driving because it's so commonplace that most people who drive are driving cars. They're not driving cattle because it's not practical when you're trying to pop to JCPenney's. So, yeah, so it's an interesting conversation, and like I say, this conflict I have with loving the old school techniques and the traditional ways of doing things, but in the last year, like I say, I've kind of turned a few corners where it's really helped me to do things digitally, and so I'm just kind of interested how that's going to start manifesting itself in a lot of schools where they don't necessarily teach this yet because it's all that's digital stuff. It doesn't.
Yeah, no,
I
think it's inevitable, and that is right around the corner. When I was over for the prosthetics event, and I was down at Falmouth, and then you and I were up at Bolton, they're already incorporating 3D scanning and printing into their programs.
Yeah.
And they're probably among the first universities to do so.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that hybrid thing, isn't it? That was a word that was used recently in the magazine, like hybrid artists that are doing some stuff digitally, some stuff practically,
Mm-hmm.
or they're comfortable enough in both that they can decide which they want to use. And I think that's the way to go, where you start pulling in the things you need.
It's along the same lines of practical effects shops now having digital departments, visual effects departments in-house also. So there's less chance of miscommunication between shops doing the practical effects and those doing the digital effects. It's all under one roof.
Yeah.
And it's basically one-stop shopping for production.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a sensible way because as well the practical, or if it's in the same department, that department can make a better call about whether something should be digital, practical, or a mix, rather than just trying to argue it out in a meeting, where you got two warring factions, the CGI department or the visual effects department and the practical. And
yeah, just because you can do something digitally doesn't always mean that you should.
Yeah. But also, if
you have to take everything into consideration.
Yeah, well, I think as well that the fact that there was a time where that was a separate department, then there was a reason for them to try and secure that business. Whereas now, I'm of the belief that there's so much visual effects, or there are so many visual effects elements, even in non-effect stuff, just changing the color of the sky or making the ground look less wet or whatever after a rainstorm. They're not looking for more stuff to do. They're all going to be in pretty much every shot. So do you know what I mean? If you can do something very well practically, it makes perfect sense to do so because it's one less thing to have to do. Whereas I think early on, it did feel like they were trying to get as much work as possible. Whereas now, I think it's just tacit. The visual effects
And I think for the most part,
there.
still practical effects are less expensive than digital ones to produce.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of stuff
at the same level of quality.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you get for free because they're shot in camera. Even if it's reference, you know, there's something in that can be used. So there's still value in having it. But yeah, that mix of the two.
I did
is
a
true.
movie. I did the effects on a movie, 2008, I think maybe, that they streamlined production because they didn't halt. I mean, they were shooting on location all over Denver, and they didn't halt production when, you know, a motorcycle would drive by or a helicopter would be overhead. You know, when you'd have to hold sound because of background elements that got in the way.
Yeah.
They looped the entire film afterwards, so they were able to just bang, 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 get all of their shots out without having to stop for these distractions. And then they just ADR'd all of the dialogue
right
down the road. That, you know, granted, that's an added expense, but you weigh that against the time lost by, you know, holding for an hour out of an entire day because of traffic noises and aircraft and whatever.
Yeah.
It balances out.
I've definitely seen how the practical stuff and the digital stuff have worked together, because in my head, as someone that is mostly practical, it's only when I'm thinking, oh, that would be really quick to just bang that out and like for example, cores. You know, the idea that you can prepare your cores digitally and then print one up, you know,
right,
and then remold it and stuff.
And I think that actually is faster than if you're trying to clay up a core where you're doing a corrected thing with clay, because you got to smooth out the clay, you got to wait for it to dry, blah blah blah. And if you're doing it digitally, you can get that same level of nice finesse on the edge with a gentle gradation, flare out, and boom, done, off to the printer.
Well, the other thing is as well, like my situation, if you've got more than one printer, you could print the core and you can print the jacket for the silicone at the same time.
Right.
And then, you know, pop them together and then just float it with silicone. And something I've seen that I think is interesting is when I've looked at, because obviously when I bought my printers, like everybody, I know nothing about it. So I'm going to make silly mistakes. So I go onto web forums and Facebook groups to try and, you know, find out what's going on. And I've seen some very interesting molding questions crop up where loads of people are printing things, but then they want to make molds of them. And so they'll have printed this creature and it's got all these horns on it and stuff. So they're coming at it from a hobby point of view where they can press print and they can render this amazing thing they got off Thingiverse. But they haven't approached it from a mold making point of view where you go, well, that would be so much easier to mold in 3 parts if you just sliced it like I would with a sculpt. And it's so easy to cut things up in Mesh Mixer, which is a free program, you know, and split them up into different models and do that kind of stuff. So there is a real need for molding skills and stuff when you do those kind of things, which is absent from if you come from a printing background, because you don't think in terms of molds because you're dealing with separate things. So it's really good to have
you don't notice all of the undercuts and holes where you can't just mold that because you'll never get them separated.
Yeah, and you could for example, like if I'm going to put pins as risers on the tips of horns, well, you could actually, you know, cut the perfect hole that you need in the horn in the modeling stage so that it prints with the hole ready for the needle, rather than trying to drill a 1 mil hole in the tip of a horn, you know,
right,
and stuff like that. So it's just little things
that'd be a good skill to have.
It is, but it's just like, but that's what I mean, and you could get it dead center without the risk of cutting into your fingers and without breaking a Dremel, you know, drill bit, by actually just making that part of the print. And that's what I'm saying. So it's knowing both of those things, and then you can utilize that to your advantage.
Oh yeah, no, I've broken off some tiny drill bits trying to do vent holes in stone jackets a number of times, because it's virtually impossible to do sometimes.
Well,
at least for Todd.
Yeah. Tough for Todd. But yeah, but yeah. So I'm kind of, I'm pleased with myself for the fact that I'm able to use these tools more efficiently all the time. And I'm learning things quicker, because once there's a certain amount of stuff you can do, then suddenly filling in the blanks becomes easier because you understand the terminology that's used to describe how to solve the problem. So there's a kind of an exponential rise, which I'm enjoying. But I'm also, when this question came up, I suddenly sort of analysed myself, like, have I forgotten all this? And do I feel guilty about being interested in the digital stuff as well? And I don't think I am, because I think, like, these are just the tools that are available to us. But give it 20 years, I don't think anyone will think. Just like if you take a photo now, of course it's a digital camera unless otherwise stated.
Well, it comes back to what Jake said when we were talking at the prosthetics event. The more you can do, the more you get to do.
Yeah. So I think it's worth exploring. It's one of those things, I think, with digital stuff, is I think you have to get enough back from it to want to pursue it. And I have been nibbling at the edges for, like I say, about 10 years before this really kicked in. So I feel like I've paid my dues in terms of worry, but I'm annoyed with myself for not getting over it earlier, because it's made life a lot easier.
Just since I was working on the third edition of my book, and added the chapter on 3D printing for prosthetics and animatronics, I have learned so much more than I learned just in researching that chapter, that for the fourth edition, I'm really excited about updating that chapter, because I personally, my skill levels have grown so much more than when I was initially doing the research, that I think now I have a lot more to share, as do you, and I'm going to make you be part of it.
Cool, man.
Then with the third edition. So the fourth edition is going to be a bodacious chapter.
Awesome. Well, I think there's also something quite heartwarming about the fact that, listen, if I can do it, promise me you can do it.
Exactly. It's my mantra. If Todd can do it, anybody can do it.
Because I think that was something that it was weirdly. I think it was Steve Wang when we were over in LA, and we chatted to him on the podcast about that, and it was really a therapy session for me to get past my ZBrush hang up.
Oh yeah,
and that was the moment. You listen back to that. That was the moment where it kind of, the string snapped in my head. I was like, oh yeah, because I felt like there was this ship that sailed and I wasn't on it.
No fear.
It's like no, it just gets better.
Go for it.
And it's ready when you are. It's literally it. Get over yourself. Like, oh yeah, I honestly thought it was like, no, it's too late now. I'm going to dig my heels in. So that I'm excited about that. So our guests on this, we've had to split this up into two, partly because it's quite a long chat, but also there's two very distinct parts of the conversation. I would say the second part is very interesting, but in a different way. So this first part is more about old school effects chat.
Yeah, a couple of amazing guys.
Ian Morse and Cliff Wallace.
I am a fanboy.
We had a great time. And what I'm really pleased about this is that we recorded this at Cliff's workshop. That was nice.
Which he calls his man cave, because he for some reason he doesn't think of it as much of a workshop anymore. I disagree. But did I send you? Did I give you copies of all the photographs I took?
Yes, and these will be on the notes and on the blog post.
Holy shit!
Yeah,
does he have some cool stuff there?
Yeah, he does have an amazing collection of things. So we'll put those pictures up. But yeah, the whole place is crammed with creatures and stuff. And it was a moody lighting. We're in a big round table, and there's light where we were, and there's just shadows of creatures.
It was cold.
Yeah.
Outside.
I just had a puncture.
And then we went to a. Oh yeah, I was just thinking about that.
I had a flat tire on the way there. It was the most annoying thing, by the side of the road in the pitch black, trying to fix this fucking wheel that wasn't having it.
Yeah. But then we went to the pub afterwards and
got some beers.
And Guinness makes everything better.
That's true enough. Yeah. So that was cool. That was very cool.
And Chinese food.
Yes. Yeah, it was a good combination. Like I say, this first one is more about the old school kind of how they started out and their jobs and all that kind of stuff and the things they worked on early doors. The next episode, which is going to come up soon, is the second part of the conversation, which is more about the business end of things and the company they started together and all that kind of stuff and how that went.
But these
nitty-gritty stuff.
Cliff and Ian are two amazing talents that I don't think get nearly enough recognition for their contributions to the industry.
Yeah, no, I think that's true.
Maybe that's just me, but they're between the two of them, they've got to have close to 100 years of experience making, and that makes them sound old because they're not. They're younger than I am.
They just started early.
Yeah, they just started early, and oh my God, what a track record!
Yeah, well, it's very cool. I mean, this is one of the privileges of doing this podcast, is that you get to chat to people who I know, have got stuff under their belt, but a lot of people haven't heard of that really should. So we get to put that out and say, hey, look at this work. The people that, look at the things that they've done. Check out the movies that they worked on 30 years ago.
I've known Ian's name for a number of years, but this was the first time we had met in person at the prosthetics event. And I met Cliff back when I was working on the first edition of the book. So we've known each other for several years. But I was still, I just in awe to be sitting there listening to them talk about these shows that we all grew up watching.
Yeah, it was amazing watching your face. There was a few times where he would sort of wistfully go off on one, and then he'd kind of look at you as if like you were bored and you were like on the edge of your seat, like, tell me more. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah, this is our chat with Ian and Cliff. Check it out.
You ever get stressed, Cliff, on a job?
Yeah, I do, actually. I worry about things a lot more than I used to. I'm a fairly laid-back person anyway. But yeah, I do worry about things more.
Running jobs, though, is stressful. I mean, there's so much to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I don't generally do it anymore.
Yeah.
It's a lot better to have someone else do that for you.
Been there, done that,
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much you can do.
Well, I love being on set, but I hate getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, yeah, I mean, if a makeup takes longer than 3 hours to put on, you've designed it wrong. Personally.
Yeah, there's ways around it.
Having just spent many weeks doing 4.5-hour makeups.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is that intricate, and sometimes you go, when you see what's done, that could have been a mask.
Yeah. Most of the time.
What it was.
Most of the time.
Yeah, which is a shame. So we should say, we're in your workshop, Cliff, surrounded by ghoulish things.
Yeah, it's my man cave these days. I mean, it doesn't
really
function as a workshop anymore.
Does it not?
No.
Well, it's not long since you had a job in it, Cliff.
I think the last job that we did in here was for a film that never happened, which was about last Christmas.
Right.
But before that, I had a spate of doing these. There was a spate of feminist horror movies, and I seemed to be their go-to man for some reason.
What's a feminist horror movie?
Well,
when all the men get destroyed.
Yes,
yeah,
basically that's pretty much it. They were very much smash the patriarchy.
That's fair enough to try and redress the balance, because it's been women getting ripped to pieces for long enough.
Yeah.
I suppose.
So I did about 3 in. It seemed a very short time. It was probably about a year. But generally, I don't run this place as a going concern anymore. I got in the industry to make horror movies. I love horror movies. I would still rather be making little, small, low-budget horror movies than working on the latest Marvel film.
They seem to have the most freedom to really explore the genre.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have a favorite that you've
horror
done?
Movies? Gosh, no. I mean, the sort of things I like are obviously the sort of classics. I like Creature from the Black Lagoon. I like obviously like the films that got me into this in the 80s. Things like The Howling and American Werewolf and The Thing and Videodrome, especially.
Fright Night.
Huge.
The original Fright Night?
Fright Night, yeah, a little bit, I guess.
I love that movie.
I mean, I'm anything in the 80s, I guess I loved. But I also loved a lot of sort of the early British things, sort of Amicus and Tegan things, and obviously Hammer things.
Yeah.
I think I remember the Hammer.
And The Wicker Man and Blood on Satan's Claw was always my favourite. Which I still love. I think it's a great movie.
I don't think I've seen that.
You should see that.
Fantastic soundtrack.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure someone's remaking it as we speak.
Probably.
Speaking of soundtracks, really dug the soundtrack on 28 Days Later.
Oh yeah,
That
absolutely.
we watched earlier today.
Yeah.
To refresh our memory in preparation for today.
We should
Yeah,
have watched
And I
that,
think
Cliff.
I enjoyed it
Sorry?
more
We
this
should have
time.
watched that, shouldn't we?
We should have done. I haven't seen it for a long time actually.
What are your memories
Yeah,
of that?
I mean, Danny Boyle obviously is a huge music fan, and yeah, great soundtrack.
It was used well as well because it really helped the story along. It wasn't just slotted in.
Yeah, I
his
mean
background.
the Brian Eno tracker really works for me.
Just gone quiet.
Yeah, it's gone quiet.
I'm trying to remember who did the.
Well, it was there's a lot of Underworld.
It's
Isn't
Godspeed,
it?
isn't it? You
Oh,
Black
it's
Emperor.
Godspeed to Black Emperor. Yeah.
That's the main big thing. Though,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's the main. Yeah.
Yeah, he's clever. He's clever with picking things.
But just using it the right way as well, moving the story along.
Yeah.
And it was weird how like the editing is so like you always feel like you're on your toes. Like you never get to relax. It's always twisted and turning.
I was feeling anxious through the whole
Yeah,
thing.
I mean,
it was
it
anxiety.
because of the pacing
the
and the way.
the whole sort of idea of the film was that it was all going to be shot on very cheap cameras, very
Which it
cheap
was.
shot, which it was. But they did spend a great deal of time lighting it
Yeah.
very carefully. But all those shots of deserted London, which were really achieved because everyone had a camera and they just went and stood on various buildings at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I was wondering how they did it because it
yeah,
looked amazing.
and
like Westminster Bridge.
Yeah,
What?
and Danny's daughter and a few of her mates stood at the end of the streets with a wad full of tenors and gave people tenors not to go down there for 5 minutes. So it was
Wow.
it was done very much on the fly, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that stuff was shot some months before actually the main film.
Wow.
So they knew they had that stuff in the bag.
I wonder if
Before
anyone was
you
doing that in
shot.
lockdown, like shooting.
Yeah, in fact, well,
escapes of the
Should have been.
You've probably seen Dave Elsie's film that you worked on.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
there's
that's the
some
point.
there's
Yeah,
some
yeah,
great
yeah.
stuff in
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's kind of very reminiscent, I thought, of 28 Days Later.
Very cool. Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff in that. I think after seeing this now, and when Cillian wakes up in the hospital, kind of in the same physical position as one of the chimpanzees that was in the lab at the beginning, I think The Walking Dead used that whole sequence as kind of an homage that when Rick wakes up in the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, 28 Days Later was responsible for kicking off that whole zombie genre again, really. I mean, even though we weren't allowed to say the Z word at the time, when I got the script through, which was by Alex Garland, I said to Danny, well, this is basically a zombie movie written by J.G. Ballard, because there's a lot of Ballard stuff in there as well, and I'm a great fan of Ballard.
Right.
In fact, the lead character is called Jim Ballard, so there's a giveaway right there.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
That people don't.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing his last name.
You never hear his last name unless
it was
it's on
fleshed
the
out.
credits. Yeah.
Oh my god.
But there's a lot of sort of high rise and a lot of Crash and Concrete Island in that, and a lot of Day of the Dead, of course, as well.
Oh my gosh. So,
Which Danny had never
again.
seen. Danny hadn't seen a lot of these zombie movies. He wasn't familiar with that at all. So he didn't really know the places that that the thing had been lifted from.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of John Wyndham and things like that in it.
yeah. Yes, I got that vibe, that whole Triffids vibe.
Yeah,
from-
definitely a Triffids thing.
yeah, which I love the BBC. Have you seen the BBC Triffids?
No, I have
show?
not.
It was really
though the
creepy.
last time I was here, I remember Rob Mayer was working on some Triffid prosthetic pieces.
Oh right.
Right.
Oh yeah, maybe did they redo? They must have remade it.
Yeah, because he was working on some kind of little wound, Triffid
Right.
wounds,
Mhm.
and that was 2009.
Yeah, I read Day of the Triffids and I Am Legend in the same month, and it was it was quite devastating. It's just it was like how lockdown made you feel, but like 10 years before that.
Well, I tell a story. I mean, how I got into the industry was that I went to Wimbledon, like you did.
Yes,
But I
Amelia
did-
Rowcroft went to Wimbledon.
Really?
Yes.
What course did you do?
Same course, the Technical Arts Interpretation.
When was she there?
She 3 years after me, so she must have graduated. She must have joined in '95. in the
Oh,
summer
okay.
of 85, yeah. And I
Because it was
graduated.
it was a really good course when I was there. Both the sculpture and the painting course.
Did you have Val Charlton there when you were there?
No, after I was there. So I mean, obviously I wanted to get into films. I was obsessed with makeup and stuff, but I didn't know how to do, and there was no courses.
Yeah.
So someone talked to me at school, said, "Why don't you do theatre design? Because it's near, and there's mould making, and it's kind of designy." So I kind of got talked into it.
So did they have the design course and the interpretation course, or the
No.
interpretation course hadn't started yet?
No.
Which was the making side of things.
Yeah.
You did both.
So you came at it more from a theater discipline?
Well, it was literally theatre design.
Yeah.
Straight down the line, which was really useful because scene painting was really useful. 'Cause
Yes.
to have a technical kind of like approach to something.
Yes.
So when I did that, and I wanted to get into films, and I really didn't know how. Had I been more aware of how to do it, because a kid in my course, Richard Padbury, got onto Jedi. I could have got in that route, but I didn't know how. So anyway, I was making props somewhere, and I was working with a guy called Jim Sands, and he was much more clued into what was going on. He'd worked on Labyrinth, and he just said one day, "If you really want to get in, I think there's this film, Little Shop of Horrors, coming in, and I'm going for an interview on it." And I just, on the back of him knowing where to go and what to do,
Yeah.
went for an interview job, and I wanted to be a sculptor because that's what I thought I did at the time. So I went for this interview with Lyle Conway, and he looked at my portfolio, and literally the stuff I had was all stuff I did for jobs. So it was also like sculpting big spoons for cats or dustbin lids or something, and it really wasn't that.
And did you get to do all of it? Did you sculpt and mould and all that, the whole
Yeah,
thing? So
yeah.
you're like a
And
jack
just
of all
stuff for
trades.
theatre, yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, "No, sorry, it's not really a job for you, sculpting." So just as I'm walking out the room thinking, okay, he said, "Do you know anything about foam?" And I thought, yeah, I know how to make foam, thinking it was polyfoam.
It's just the two-part urethane
Because
stuff.
I made loads of stuff for the theatre. And he said, "Oh, come back." Yeah, so I ended up being a foam assistant on it for Little Shop. And at the same time, we had a shop. The foam shop was obviously away from the as these things always are. It was away from the main creature shop.
Whereabouts was it? At Shepperton?
No, it was at Pinewood.
Pinewood.
And they were doing Aliens at the same time, so we did stuff for Aliens as well.
That's pretty cool.
I was assistant to a girl called Sue Higgins, who'd been Tom McLaughlin's girlfriend. So she kind of learned how to do foam from Tom, and I learnt from her. So that was really quite useful.
Wow.
That's pretty close to the top.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I came across Tom McLaughlin fairly early too, because I used to write to whoever was doing makeup effects shows in England,
Yeah.
and say, "Can I come down and visit your workshop?" And the first person who replied to me was Rick Baker, who was over here doing Greystoke, and I went to see him, and he introduced me to Tom, who was doing not only the Greystoke stuff but the Life Force stuff at the same time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom said, "This is foam latex, this is how you do it. You can buy it off me." So I used to buy all my foam latex stuff off Tom.
That's mad. And now he's just known for silicon, really, isn't he?
Mhm.
The silicon finishing powder and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah, I think he sold the foam stuff completely.
Mm.
Well, he'd kind of like got the chemical people to mill his chemicals, and I don't think they really understand what they're doing. They just have his formula, I think, and
Sure.
this is aquaspersions, and they just make the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really do kits because they don't really know how to
Aquaspersion's still going?
yeah.
Because did they supply all the stuff for Spit and Image? Am I thinking
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I think we used to get that at animated extras, because I was a foam runner on Mary Riley, and I'm pretty sure that's where the stuff came from.
Do you guys get any of the U.S. stuff, like Monster Maker's foam? Or is
We
it
do
all-
now.
Do you?
Yeah.
I'm used to
Have
get.
you used it? What do you think of it?
I mean, we're talking 35 years ago here, so.
Yeah, it was pretty slim.
But they were Gil Moscow kits, I think.
yeah.
Around and
Yes, there might have been.
but it was it didn't really work very well. I think because we never had sunbeam mixers, I think was the big difference.
Yeah, we had the big Hobarts.
And
Yeah.
Kenworths.
Kenwood
Well,
chefs.
then was all the big stuff always worked, but the actual instructions that came with the
That's
GM
for
kits
the
never
Sunbeam.
worked. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you had to reformulate it really.
I think running foam is one of those jobs that if you can do it, did you find yourself doing that a lot because it was something that either other people were reluctant to do, or once you get good at it, it's like, well, why would we send someone in who doesn't know it's going to work? We're sending Ian because you know how to do it. Do you know what I mean? So you kind of get trapped. Or did you not feel that way about it?
No, I was pretty trapped doing it.
But happy enough.
But happy to be working, really.
Yeah.
And this is where I met Cliff, because we were running stuff at Pinewood, and we were away, and he used to come and visit, didn't you?
Yeah, I think probably the first time I met you, when you were doing Little Shop and Aliens, I think I came in a couple of times to that foam lab with the molds for Rawhead Rex, which was the first film that I worked on.
It's delicious. I love
and that was being covertly run in the same lab.
The notes for this podcast are going to be really cool.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be writing every 5 seconds. Sorry, I'm just getting fizzy pants listening to all this. It's very good. Keep going.
There was one day when we had the Rawhead Rex thing in the oven, mould in the oven, and it was a big walk-in oven. It's quite massive. And some big wiggers came round, and also Lyle Conway came round, and also I think Stan Winston came round as well. So they all sort of come in the same morning, and we had this thing that if we found out, we're going to get in trouble. And at one point, I kind of was like walking over towards the door was open of the oven, and I sort of fell against the door to close it so no one could see there was a very obviously different looking mould in there from plant moulds.
Yeah. Oh dear Lord, that's amazing.
I mean, maybe I don't know what would have happened. It would seem quite generally all right to do the Little Shop and the Alien stuff at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, at least they were both in the same studio.
Yeah. Were they both Warner Brothers? No.
I don't know.
No. 20th Century Fox.
20th Century Fox,
Yeah.
I don't know how we got paid. I guess it was kind of like, because we're getting money from Little Shop. I guess I think we were probably getting backhanded.
I doubt if you were getting paid for Rawhead Rex, actually.
I think we did.
You
got something.
You probably got a couple £100 in your back pocket. I would think.
Bag of digestive biscuits.
Probably not that much.
So that was an amazing movie. I mean, that was a big deal. Little Shop of Horrors, like the whole puppeteering of all those plants
for a first film.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, and also everybody at one point had to puppeteer.
Right.
It was just generally accepted that they were puppeteers. There were like 10 of them, and very good ones, you know.
Yeah.
But it was generally accepted that you do a bit of puppeteering. So, and I've always puppeteered ever since then, really, because I did a bit on that, and which is quite lucky.
There's some awesome, and they were quite. I mean, it's like a who's who of the industry that was in that. I know David White was there, and Nick Williams.
It's Dave Ellis's first job.
Right.
Danny Parker was on it.
That's right. Yeah.
Neil Scanlon was chiefing up the animatronics.
Wow. That was quite something. I mean, is there any footage of like the whole behind the scenes stuff? Because that puppeteering, I remember seeing some video years ago, animated, of them like operating like rigging, and it's quite a performance to see all these people making the full size Audrey do its thing. It's like
well, because
a lot of movement
even
there.
for the theater productions, the big Audrey is quite a feat of puppetry.
I mean, it was the first real proper film sets I'd seen, really, in for as a job, and they were all legged up. I mean, the shop was all like 6 foot above ground, so that people could walk underneath. And I just thought that's how things were. I didn't realise it was, it was very, very special because the director was a puppeteer, and that's how they worked. And it was very, very clever.
Yeah.
And very, all around getting this plant to look good. So the whole production was more or less based on that, really.
Yeah.
And it had been a successful stage show, so I guess they knew what they were doing. And I was on it for most of a year, I think, between the two of them.
My wife's getting ready to music direct a theater production, A Little Shop, that's going to open after the first of the year. So and she's done it a couple of times before, and I'm hoping that they will ask me to build some little Audreys, because there are a couple of puppet makers in Colorado who've done the full-blown Audreys before, but I want to kind of take the little baby Audreys to a new level with that, because I've already got an old Maxwell House coffee can, so I want to build the little one with some servos to have it actually be able to move and work independently, have somebody RC control it from off stage, but then have the mid-size Audrey that usually comes in with a fake arm holding the pot and the arm up into the Audrey, but have that so it looks like somebody's got a fake arm, and then sets it down on a table that clearly is open underneath, and that Audrey will continue to talk and move and interact with Seymour.
That'd be cool. I mean, when you see that, that's the kind of thing that you really go, this is what practical effects about. To see a full-size Audrey doing its thing, it's quite something. I'm sure I'd love to have seen that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great
I don't think it's
film.
something you'd see these days, unfortunately.
No, CG.
Yeah.
I doesn't even try.
Yeah.
But even things like, they did some clever things like had Rick Moranis half speed, so that when the actor at half speed, so when they filmed at normal, when they see it at normal speed, it's all it's all
Very dynamic movements.
Yeah, and a lot of things shot in reverse and things like that.
Yeah.
I seem to remember.
Yeah. Very cool. What about you, Cliff? How are your memories of starting out?
I wanted to be a rock and roll star, and that didn't pan out. So I was at Central London Poly doing the first media studies course in the country, which was an ideal course for me because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. That's why they're so popular, I think, media studies courses. And I really went there because they had a good TV studio. It was right next to the BBC in Great Portland Street. And they had all these facilities to make good pop videos. So that's why I went, really. But I got interested in makeup effects sort of while I was there. I saw The Howling, and that was the thing that really convinced me that I could probably do this for a living. So I used to look at the 2 magazines that existed at the time and the 1 book, and that was about it. There was
Is that the Lee Bacon book?
Sorry, yeah, the Lee Bacon book came after. I think there was the Corson book, was the one that was really really instrumental, I think, in getting me interested. No courses, no internet, of course. So I just used to write to whoever was in charge of makeup effects of anything that was shooting in England. The first person that I met, as I said earlier, was Rick Baker and Greystoke. And
a bit of a result for a first.
It was. It was a bit
Impressive.
of a result. And bless him, because I didn't have a portfolio or anything. I was just vaguely interested. I was a film fan. I knew every film that he'd done, even the most obscure ones. But I went along to meet him, and just everything blew me away. And I thought, I can't do this.
So you got to see the Greystoke stuff?
I got to see the Greystoke stuff, and it all looked so complicated.
Was that at Shepperton?
No, this was at Elstree.
Elstree, right.
And I thought, I can never do this. This is far too complicated. But I sort of kept pottering away, and then they were doing a film called Company of Wolves at Shepperton, which Chris Tucker was in charge of, and I knew of him because I'd seen The Elephant Man. So I wrote to him, and he said, "Come along." And I think within about 20 minutes of getting there, he'd given me and another chap who was there, who I assumed worked for him, a head which was a sort of stretching wolf head, and said, "This is on set at 2:00. Can you do something with it?" And so myself and the other chap who was there, who was Dave Elsey, who'd also written to Chris Tucker at the same time and been invited along on the same day, got to play around with this sort of stretching head and add a few balloons under the skin and things like that. So it
was like a legit job. It was
and it was like a legit job. And afterwards, I got talking to Dave, and Dave said, well, how long have you been working for Chris? And I said, well, since this morning. And he said, well, me too. And that's how our friendship started.
I mean, to take a chance
amazing.
on 2 youngers, that's amazing. I mean, that's
that's Chris Tucker.
The interesting thing about doing that was that I saw the difference between English makeup effects and American makeup effects. And the English ones, all those things were held together with bits of string, literally, and magnets and bits of dental acrylic and elastic bands. But it all worked, and I suddenly, through meeting Chris, saw that I could probably get in the industry at some point. And I sort of made stuff in my bedroom for about a year and a half, 2 years, I guess, and started making masks. And one Halloween, there was a friend of mine who had a hair stall in Covent Garden Market, and he started selling some of my masks. And a researcher from a kids' TV show called Number 73 invited me on the show. And I went along and with a few masks and did this sort of TV show, which was a live thing on a Saturday morning. And while I was on, someone rang me up and offered me a job on Rawhead Rex, and that was the first. That was my first job.
Have you got video of that? I bet I could track
burnt
it.
I
remember that show. I loved it. It was chaos.
Along with my final year project, which was an awful Dark Crystal sort of rip-off thing with loads of puppets. So yeah, I went along. I went along and did a few weeks' work on Rawhead Rex, which was a low-budget thing that Clive Barker had written. And while I was there, there was a mould maker there called John Schoonerhead, and he said, if you like Clive Barker, you should go and talk to Bob Keane. He's doing another movie with Clive Barker that Clive's directing. And I knew of Clive because I was a big horror fan, and I was writing a lot of stuff at the time, writing a lot of horror stories. And so that sounded, a perfect fit. So I went along and met Bob. And that hadn't actually started at the time. There was about a 3-month sort of hiatus before it actually started. So I just did a couple of jobs for Bob while we were waiting for Hellraiser to start. So I did a thing called White of the Eye, which was directed by Donald Kamal, who directed Don't Look Now with Nick Rogue. And of course I was a big Nick Rogue fan because I've always been a big David Bowie fan. So, Man Who Fell to Earth came up, so that was great to meet him. Amazing. And while I was there, actually, they sent along Nick Dubman also turned up for the same job, and I remember Nick saying to the producer, "Oh, you've got Cliff and Nigel Booth here, who Bob had also sent along, and you don't need me really. You've got two of the best young makeup artists around," which was kind of very nice, but not true. Not in my case, anyway. You've got a very good sculptor and a bit of a chancer.
Well, I mean, they must have seen something in you to leave you with, that stuff. Like, we're joking about you being left with that, the wolf, the stretched out wolf head, but obviously.
Yeah, did you stay in touch with Chris after that?
Yeah, I'm still in touch with Chris. Yeah, he's
a lovely man.
He's a lovely man. Very scary to this day. I mean, I would never have liked to work for him, but yeah, Dave Elston and me used to go over to his house in Pangbourne, which was like this big mansion, and sit in his front room and look at all these beautiful books of photos of all the movies that have been on, photos that no one's ever seen.
Well, I've always kind of
close-ups of the
thought of Chris as the English Dick Smith.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, I mean he was very good friends with Dick. Dick always used to come and stay with Chris in Pangbourne Towers. Yeah, I mean the last time I went over to Chris, actually, I'd only really ever seen the front of his house. I'd only ever seen the sitting room and the makeup room and his photography studio. And I went over for dinner with my wife, and he sort of said, "Come into this wing here. I haven't been in here for 20 years, and opened these doors onto some of the most amazing things you've ever seen that he still had." Stuff from June and stuff on the Elephant Man, painted wax head of the Elephant Man, which was exquisite. But the fact he's got parts of his house that he hadn't been to for years.
That's quite amazing, isn't it?
It's a huge place. But Chris had always been very interested in photography, so all his photographs were beautiful. I imagine there was a lot of retouching involved.
He gave me some lovely pictures for the first edition of my book, which, my first trip over here was in 2008 when I was still doing research for it. And when I went to IMATS, and Neil Gorton goes, "Todd, come over here," and I walk up, and it's Chris Tucker. And I was dumbfounded. I was so starstruck. And he said,
No,
I want you to meet someone.
He's a really interesting man. I mean, when we started playing around with translucent materials, which was about 1991, 92, when we first started Creature Effects, I remember going to Chris's house with one of these heads that we'd made, which was a translucent urethane for Steve Norrington's first film, Death Machine, which we were very proud of, you know. And we took this thing to Chris and said, "Oh," and he sort of said, "Oh yes, I was making silicon heads actually 20 years ago," you know. And you know, he did a lot of this stuff that we now take, you know, for granted. He'd actually done it and thrown it away, you know.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? That's very cool. Yeah, because I remember you doing a silicone makeup on. It was an advert, wasn't it? With the.
Yeah, I mean that I think that was probably the first silicone makeup that was done, certainly in Europe. We've been talking to Gordon Smith and Dick, and Gordon had sent over some pieces from Legend of the Fall, which were all encapsulated in urethane. We had a guy working for us, a guy called Colin Ware, who'd done some fantastic work. Yeah. We'd seen some bodies he'd made for Prime Suspect, and he had encapsulated gelatin to stop gelatin melting, basically. So when we started looking at the silicone stuff, he said, "Well, how about encapsulating it in cat plastic?" So that's how that whole cat plastic thing came around. I think we were actually the first people to do it.
What year was this?
This would have been about 92, 93, something like that. Wow. So it really was right at the beginning. And you know, our main sort of thrust was that we were trying to do makeups that were reusable. Which was kind of the wrong approach for using cat plastic, but it was a big process in those days, because there weren't any platinum based silicons for a start.
And I remember the first time I'd heard about encapsulated silicone, it was being encapsulated with silicone.
Yeah.
So there was an edge you could blend off.
We tried so many things, I think.
There wasn't that A and B easy. I mean, Cosmosil had one, I think.
I mean, I know our first silicone appliances were tin silicone, and
there was one in the States called Liquid Skin.
There was a lot of oil involved in that used to seep through the barrier and all sorts after time. I know when we sent the pieces over to Dick Smith, he said, "Oh, well, it's a good idea, but the cat plastic is a bit brittle. It's a bit hard. You know, Stuart Freeborn was using this cat plastic 20 years ago. Maybe you should talk to Stuart about where he was getting this cat plastic from."
And which cat plastic did you use?
It was straightforward Glysan.
Right.
But what we used to do is we used to make it softer by adding something called dibutyl phthalate to it, which is now completely banned. You can't get that anywhere. But they used to use it in kids' toys when we were using it. That advert you mentioned was the first one that had widely been used, I think.
What was it, Allied Dunbar or something?
Yeah, it was a sort of Grim Reaper makeup for Allied Dunbar. Yeah. We had actually done a film called Incognito a couple of months beforehand, and there was actually some encapsulated silicone pieces in that. There was a guy, I think, who gets a pencil stuck in his eye or something, and that was an encapsulated piece. So I think that was actually the first, but certainly the Allied Dunbar thing
I remember
was the first one that I'd written about.
Yeah, no, I remember that Allied Dunbar one.
That's the only reason we people knew we'd done it as I wrote something for one of the magazines.
Right.
We'll have to see if we can track that down.
Yeah, it was the magazine that it's featured in was one of those I can't
Like
remember.
cinematographer.
Model
or
error.
something?
No.
Oh, okay. SFX.
Models or something. I can't remember. It's probably down there somewhere.
Okay.
we can probably look it up.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Because I remember using animated in 94 it would have been. 94. And bodies for Mary Riley, and they were cast in skin flex from BJB.
Yeah, I mean, I remember.
No one was using silicone, really.
Well, I remember there was the first sort of silicone head that we did was for a TV thing called Cold Lazarus, and we made one head for it, and I think Animated made another head of Albert Finney.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably silicone. And so we were both doing things at much the same time, I think.
Yeah.
But I remember our first translucent heads, the ones we did for Death Machine, were because we'd seen the stuff that ADI had been doing for Demolition Man, I think, which they used something called ESD40, which was a sort of a plasticized urethane.
Right.
And we found something very similar over here called Hyperlast. And then we went on to something called Cellarcast after that, which we did a fake head of Sean Connery for First Night.
Oh my God, with Richard Gere.
Yeah,
I remember that being shot
and that was it was a really, really nice head actually. Although the production told us we wouldn't be allowed to cast Sean Connery's head, so we actually got a cast from Never Say Never Again, I think, and aged it up and made a very nice head of him. And I remember him actually coming into our little workshop, which was a porter cabin at Pinewood, and saying that was a lovely head you did, boys, but why didn't you ask me to do a live cast? And we said, well, your people wouldn't allow us. But that Cellarcast was a good material. It felt a lot like silicone. Unfortunately, it wasn't UV stable, so during the course of the film, he changed race.
That's quite fun.
There was a bunch of those things that you'd paint them before the thing, and then by the time you got it on set, like Conathane was one, wasn't it? And it was Evergreen.
Yeah,
Evergreen, because I remember there was some square pusher stuff that Millennium did. Were you involved in that? That were being cast. They had like an 8-year-old girl. They cast her in sections and then made a body, and it was like a race against time. I remember Waldo, I think, painting it, and it was having to paint it with Trier inks.
Yeah,
to get it to stain.
We painted everything with Trier inks originally, and also did Dave Elsey reminded me the other day, because we were working together, is that we were probably the first people who ever used to flick paint onto heads. That whole flicking thing that became so popular for makeups.
Yeah, it's just kind of like standard now for Skin Illustrator.
Kind of thing we did. Yeah, there weren't Skin Illustrators then.
Yeah. No, that's what I mean.
I don't think I saw Skin Illustrator until I went to the first makeup show in LA. I think that was the first time that I'd seen any Skin Illustrator.
Yeah. Well, it'd been Real Colour before that, I guess, but it wasn't. It wasn't something that a lot of people used over here. It was Supercolour and the RCMA palettes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was all foam.
I mean, going back to those Chris Tucker photos, I mean, they were foam painted with rubber mask grease paint, and they look immaculate. So anyone who sort of says they can't, you can't make foam look good.
I just had someone ask me.
They need to see those photos.
In a message just. I think it was just after I'd gotten here. I was in Falmouth already. And he was asking me about must-haves for the kit, and he said, what about rubber mask grease paint? And I said, it's not being used a lot these days, but, better to have it not need it. And it's certainly something that will work with what he was talking about, using it for.
Yeah, I think that whole translucency thing in makeup really started you know, when Jurassic Park came out, we basically thought we'd all lose our jobs within a few years, and it came about really as a reaction to that, going on set with something that looked good to the eye as opposed to just looking good on camera. And you know, foam makeups can look brilliant on camera, but they often look a bit crepey to the eye, and you didn't have that with a silicone head or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was the main reason it came about. But I think, you know, I still think that we use silicone far too much. We use it for things that really it's not the right material for.
Foam seems to be making quite a resurgence,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I'm thrilled about because I think it's my favorite thing
I
to
mean,
do.
you know, you can. It actually glues to the face as regards to just being anchored, which I think, you know, I don't think we've ever really cracked to the gluing silicone thing.
No, it's always a little bit like, you know,
And
you get the silicone detached from the encapsulant sometimes on the high
you get
stress
that a
area.
lot. And also the weight of silicone. You know, the ideal material is probably out there, but I've stopped looking for it. Someone will find it. It's probably being used all the time in some other industry that we don't know about. I mean, the silicone stuff really came from medical prosthetics, you know, and it's not such a big leap to go from oh yeah, they're using this in medical to they're using this in makeup. That's not a big leap, but you know, if you think about, oh yeah, they're using something in the automobile industry, or you know, deep sea fishing, or something like that, then that's a big leap for the imagination. So you know, the ideal material that is lightweight, that you can stick, that's translucent, that you can paint easily, that's reusable,
That would be amazing.
is out there, I'm sure, but we just haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
And we did spend a lot of time in the mid-90s trying to find it when no one was employing us, and we had a lot of time on our hands.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing with silicone is it's one of those materials that's scalable, because you can kind of show someone how to do it, and to a degree, so long as someone's sort of in control of the cap plastic and the actual act of filling, you can have other people involved.
It's become far easier. I mean,
but foam is one of those things where every time you mix
it's still kind of alcohol.
It's got to be monitored constantly.
Although Ian's probably like, it's fine, what are you on about?
That's fine.
But there is a certain magic to it, I think. Well, because the weather affects it, and the humidity, and
air
I guess if you've
pressure.
got
I have to. It runs completely different at the elevation where I live than at sea level.
But you know, you've got to remember that when we were playing around with stuff in the early 90s, there weren't any commercially available kits. We were using silicones that were used for encapsulating electrical components. Was one that I think it was something made by General Electric. I can probably even remember the name, but you know, the weren't stuff. The chemical companies that we use, you know, sort of the Mold Lifes and the Jacobsons and all that, they didn't have any of that.
Yeah, it was more for an electrical insulation.
So, there was no imperative for them to try and produce something with a good name and that met your needs. Yeah, that's quite a recent.
You know, and I remember thinking, you know, the first time I saw a silicone makeup glued on with more silicone, I remember thinking, well, that's like a sort of chemical thing that's going on your face, and that's probably not a great idea, and things like that. But you know, I mean, we were using all sorts of strange things that probably weren't that safe at the time.
So can I get you to twivel your microphone slightly?
Yeah, of course. Oh,
there we go.
Not been sued though, Cliff, have you?
No, not been sued.
No one's died.
That one died.
But like you say, it's just what was going on at the time. I'm sure 30 years from now they'll be like, what, you could buy sugar in the shops?
Yeah.
Are you mad?
I remember everything was tin silicone. There were no platinum-based silicons around. I think the only one there was that guy, Les Cook, used to come around.
Oh
with
my God, from
Ambersil.
Ambersil.
And it never worked because it was so... anything would make it go
him
wrong,
coming around the college.
But yeah, everyone used to hide from him. Bless him.
You're not the first person to have said that on this podcast.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no.
He made quite a mark.
I mean, we Dave and I used to physically hide when he came round.
He's not the C latex guy, is he?
Sorry?
He's not the C latex guy, is he?
No, he's dead now.
Oh,
Actually.
yeah.
He passed away a few years ago, yeah.
Yeah, I remember Let's Go. Ambassil was the company, or the products. I don't know.
Are they still
where.
going, Amber?
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, bless him. So so you were running foam, and then you got to do a bit of everything. So what did you bounce?
No, the running foam. I had a little heyday. I went on to sort of like things like, because there's not many people doing it. They're doing it at Henson's, but I went on to.
Did you work at Henson's?
No,
no.
I was off the job there, but I never took it for some reason. I did like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and the first Batman.
Yeah, you famously did the Batman suit, so I remember.
Yeah.
Coming around, you had a little workshop. Well, I ended up having a workshop with you in
Should we go to
in
there?
Chalk Farm.
'Cause
You were running Batman suits there. weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was you'd think would nowadays you think that was pretty straightforward, but they really didn't want a rubber suit.
Really?
No.
Were they still thinking the Lycra is sort of?
Well, I don't know what they
Adam West
wanted.
kind of
They
look?
hired Bob Ringwood, the costume designer, who'd done all those lovely. He'd done Excalibur and he did the David Lynch Dune thing. So they saw those still suits, I think, and they were all leather. Thought, we'll get that guy in because they were cool, and he didn't really have a clue. And I don't quite know. I think it was Tim Burton actually decided he wanted rubber.
I remember the big thing was that they had to come out in the mould absolutely perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
See,
They
this is the thing, there
weren't
wasn't-
painted. There were no seams on them.
We
Yeah.
didn't have like the superhero movies coming out like you do now. So that
No,
suit, we
absolutely.
didn't see a suit like that before.
No.
There was like the Lycra bodysuits,
Yeah.
maybe.
It
But
was
there hadn't
c-
been that many superhero movies really at the time. In
Uh,
89, was this? Or
Well, there'd
88?
been Superman.
Yeah, exactly.
Chris
So it was
Reeves.
Lycra and it was Christopher Reeve's body, that was it. Or, I don't think pad it out. but
I
it
think
wasn't-
what happened, and I've pieced it together, is that Batman came up and Steve Norrington decided that he wanted to do the Batman suit. So he went to Tim Burton. He did a Captain Britain thing, which I phoned for him on David White. He had his live cast and did a Captain Britain thing, which was lovely, and painted it all up. And he took it to a meeting. I don't know this for officially because it was sort of top secret at the time, but he took it to a meeting with Tim Burton, sorry, and they liked it. Steve never got the job, but in Tim Burton's head, he saw foam as a thing that he could do.
You see the potential
Potential of it.
yeah.
So then he got Vin Burnham involved through Bob Ringwood, and she was like a costume person. So for a long, they ended up with foam, and it was. They kept changing the design of the head, and as Cliff said, no one thought you could paint it, or they should paint it. And of course, when they, because in those days it was you had to have union mold makers. You couldn't mold things yourself, and the head was in two pieces. And so there was a seam on it, and that was a massive nightmare because they didn't want to seam it and hit the seam. So in the end, what happened was, I kind of said to them, "Look, I think I'm going to do a collapsible core and remold it myself." And I think Nick was involved. I think they asked Nick if that was at all possible, and I think
he
he
was
said
doing the Joker, wasn't he?
he was doing the Joker, and I said, "Yeah, that's probably possible." So it kind of got done behind the backs of union mold makers who I hope aren't going to hunt me down and kill me now.
But it was a weird time. I remember that. I remember them. I remember on Mary. What that would have been 1888.
Yeah,
That would have been Batman, and I was on Mary Riley in '94. So only 6 years later, and there was still that union-y thing, and then it was petering out by the time I was on Harry Potter. I remember there was a lot of friction
well, it was
with the younger people coming in, but they would
was
work in a
basically-
different way.
It was basically Bob Keane who got rid of it. Really,
Right.
He just hired people, and you were doing live casts on Hellraiser. Weren't
Oh
you?
yeah, absolutely.
You didn't have to get union.
We were pretty much doing everything.
Were
And,
collapsible core molds much of a thing at the time?
No, I don't know where I saw it from. Actually, I just and I say a collapsible core. It wasn't Rob DeFreitas clever. It was just basically, just a bit that come apart, and it had one piece silicon jacket, a thing with a jacket, which was not revolutionary, but
It was a weird. Yeah, it was weird that whole union thing. I mean, over here, it's not the same as the American union. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like they
Yeah.
had a way of mold making. Was just I remember the molds were just like the mold makers got to make the molds because once the sculpt was done and it came into their domain, they mold it how molds are molded. That's what they do.
And they did a beautiful job.
They did a beautiful job, but there was, at no point was a mold maker then going on to the person casting the material to say, where would you like the seams, which happens now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's an interaction. It was just like, no, this is now my job. I'll do it the way I'm going to do it, and then you hand it on. And I remember hearing, people like, sanding things off to make molds easier, and it's like, no, that's all the skin texture. We need that. Do you know what I mean? Because they weren't prosthetic-y people that were making. They were just mold, not just, but do you know what I mean? They weren't part of a continuum. This was just their domain. And then you had people coming in around the time I started that were like, I'm making a mold a certain way because I want to get this result. And that was new, and that wasn't jiving with how they were doing
the bigger problem was they also had to do the life casts.
Right.
So you had to entrust them to get your life cast for you. And they never got a life cast of Michael Keaton.
Right.
So they got his body for some reason, but he wasn't. They come back without his head, so it never really fitted.
Yeah, which is for a cowl is quite important.
Yeah. I mean, they took some very clever measurements. This is all before I was taken on, but
right.
Anyway, it got done. No one got hurt. It's in history now.
They look great.
People seem obsessed with that suit. I'm always being sort of people. Do you have like a spare foam? No,
I still have one.
Shut up.
I still have. Well, it's in the loft at my mum and dad's house, but I still have a Michael Keaton foam.
No
Really?
way.
Yeah. It's probably dust by now. I haven't seen it for years. And
It's not painted, dude. So it's probably.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and it will be dark and in a black plastic bag. So maybe I'm sitting on a fortune.
Are you supposed to have it, or are Warner Brothers going to track you down?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they'd track me down. But I mean, in those days, it was quite possible to just go around the skips at Pinewood and nick anything you want. I mean, I had an alien egg for years from Aliens. That's just what you used to do.
Yeah. Before the internet and eBay. None
Well,
of this
but
stuff was...
and absolutely, before.
I should say that I had, as Cliff said, I had a little workshop in Kentish Town, and it was just me and I had Stuart Conran working with me, so it was just two of us scratching our heads trying to work out how to do this thing. And it all got done. It was all very, it seemed like more like we were opening new ground than we were really.
Did you have people showing you stuff, or was it a case of you having to figure stuff out yourselves? Back then, do you remember going to someone saying, "How do you do this?" and them telling you? Or was it
I do remember ringing up Rob Bottin because they wanted a shine on it, but they couldn't paint it. So I rung up. I don't know how I did this. I think Warner Brothers got me a number, and I rung up Rob Bottin's workshop, and I think I spoke to Rob and asked him what he did on RoboCop, because that had the right sort of sheen, and he said they had this stuff called Armor All.
Right.
Which I think is for buffing up car stuff, I think. It's for
cleaning the tires or the dashboard.
Which we don't have in this country, that actual product, but I think we worked out
something
kind of
like
it. WD-40.
I think they were silicon sprayed, weren't they?
There was silicon spray, yeah.
I seem to recollect these.
So that was the
So that was just a finish over the finished suit, you mean?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because that's an oil that doesn't damage foam. I remember we used to use castor oil and silicon oil to lubricate the syringe, the plunger, the giant syringe. We had the 6-foot syringe for filling out foams.
But I think we can get Armor All now. I've used it somewhere.
That's what I mean. So the ease of all of things and the free flowing information is so common now. It's really important to sort of set that scene of just how.
Yeah, there's no internet. How would you find this thing out?
The information was with the people doing it.
The guy who did RoboCop and ask him.
Yeah. I mean, I remember starting doing foam animated, and it was Nick Williams that showed me running foam, I think, and David White helped me with bits when I got problems, but there were times where they were busy doing other things. And next door they were doing Judge Dredd, and Reza Karim was there, and he had run foam, I think, for animated the year before on Frankenstein, and so he was very kind and helped me out. But that's the thing, is like, who do you turn to? A lot of this stuff you were just digging new ground yourselves?
No, I mean, I think it's always been a very small industry over here, and it was always a very male dominated industry. So we were all kind of fanboys. You did you did get a lot of information from other people. I mean, I think when I went to Bob Keene's, I think I learnt more in the first couple of weeks than I've worked out in the last 4 years in my bedroom.
I think that's the case. Same as anything, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I tell students when I teach them that you learn so much here, but your first week, in on a proper job, you're going to learn so much more.
Mind-blowing, isn't it?
When you're doing it in anger, and it can't go wrong.
Yeah,
like it can at college. You have to, you learn some more, don't you? So much more.
Yeah, and also you get to see people doing their thing. That's the thing. I think when you're surrounded by students, some may be working hard, some not. But when you actually see, a sort of a professional with a deadline and a fire behind them, they get stuff done. Perhaps that's not the best expression to use. A fire in your arse. That's not. You know what I mean. But yeah.
Also, Alien 3. Was that before Batman?
Alien 3 would have been after Batman.
After Batman, yeah. I think I got that. And that was quite a big one because I don't think Aliens was, apart from the animatronic thing, I think most of Aliens hadn't really been a full foam suit. Right. And I think when people had done Predator and things, they hadn't just foamed a full suit. But when Tom and Alec came over, they said, you can do it in pieces. No, we just do a suit, shall we? Just do the whole thing in one. And the head separate, and which seemed logical to me because I knew that you could get a whole bunch of Hobarts in the same room and build an oven.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Rawhead suit was a whole suit, wasn't
but
it?
We were
apart
crazy.
from its arms and its legs.
But when in America when they've done
torso with a head attached to it,
maybe that's where and
that was kind of
but I think that was kind of.
Stupid.
Yeah, stupid. Yeah. We don't, and that's the mold you gave us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No one had thought to break it up.
No.
But I think when they did all the other big things like Predator, they were all done in bits.
Yeah.
And the other Alien.
Yeah, the aliens were bits assembled on.
Yeah.
On diving suits, weren't they?
Right.
If I remember rightly.
Apart from the animatronic thing, which was all foam, and a lot of the Queen was foam as well, but they not the whole suit.
If I recall, that Queen mold was maybe the largest foam mold.
Oh Christ, yeah. And again, I mean, those molds were hanging around for a long time. I can remember casting a load of stuff out of those Alien Queen molds in the 90s with Dave Shiguri.
Dave Shiguri, he was the foam guy.
He was the foam guy. I mean, he's particularly polyfoam.
Yes, that's right.
And the person responsible for what we always use for masks, which was clay dispersed latex. That was latex that had clay dispersed into it.
Right.
Which was something that he came up with on Greystoke for Rick Baker for the chimp's feet to make them more hard wearing.
Right.
And clay dispersed latex was the thing that I used to make all my
I assume
masks
that was a
no, it wasn't. It was something that he
I think people have forgotten about it, haven't they?
With Baker and gone to Slough Rubber, who were where you used to get all your latex needs from, and said, can you do a latex that's got clay dispersed in it to make it harder? I remember Dave Elsey telling me one day that he'd come up with something called plubber, and he wouldn't tell me what it was, and he just mixed plaster into latex and called it plubber.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I remember on the Mummy, I think it was the first Mummy. Yeah, it's the first Mummy, and they had some breakaway heads, and Brian Best had made this breakaway for me to experiment with, like vermiculite and plaster and all these kind of mixes, and I think Nick Dublin penned it Brianite. Which was good.
I remember.
I think that was done before then, actually.
We used to mix vermiculite.
Oh, I'm sure it had been, but I don't think he had that formula, so he kind of worked on it.
I think there was something like that done on the Hunger, wasn't there? That's, anyway.
Yeah. I don't think he knew about it, though.
There's nothing new.
No, this is just people rediscovering things.
Absolutely. It's all rediscovering.
So I think Alien 3 is where we first, and I think I came up with it, where we just foamed onto Lycra suits, which is a big thing. So you could just zip him up the back and put him in. I think it's industry standard now, but I don't think it'd been done before.
Right.
Who are those people that used to make the Lycra? Gandolfi.
Yeah.
We used to, and they'd make them to your.
They were in Soho, weren't they? They were like lycra suits made to order.
Yeah.
And they were made
on
to
Baker Street, actually. I think they were.
Right.
On Baker Street, first of all. Yeah.
But I think we just had Tom's life cast.
21D.
No, not quite.
A little bit farther up.
Yeah.
So that was quite cool.
That's Cliff and Ian. What a pair.
They're awesome, aren't they? I had a good time chatting with them.
Yeah, they're amazing guys. Yeah, that was such a fun evening.
But we'll get the second part out soon. I think I've got nothing more to add other than, obviously, as always, if you have anything you want to ask or you can think of someone you like us to speak to, get in touch at stuartandtodd@gmail.com.
Yeah, and please leave us a voice message on the website, and we'll play it on an upcoming episode.
There's just a one button you press and you can record direct from the website. You don't need to download anything special. We like to hear people.
Even if it's nothing more than just letting us know who you are and where you're listening from.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Just to find out where people are listening from. And how you listen to the podcast. Do you do it when you're working? Do you do it when you drive? Do you do it to spite yourself because you hate your ears? I don't know. Let me know. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts this week because I've been working in the workshop all week. And I've been burning through all kinds of stuff. I like
the two you recommended to me, I really enjoyed.
Who did I recommend to you?
It was Akimbo.
Oh, yeah.
I listened to a couple of Akimbo episodes.
Seth Godin. It's very good.
Seth Godin, yeah.
He's an amazing thinker and speaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also...
very thought-provoking stuff.
I listen to a mix of things as well, like a lot of NPR stuff, like Planet Money, because I don't really know anything about finance, and they talk about money in a very interesting way. I think. I'm going through them now. Loads of BBC ones as well. WTF with Mark Maron. That's usually quite good fun. Alexi Sale podcast, the Blind Boy podcast. I keep going on about that, but I really like that one. I've got one more. Oh, there's a new one. I haven't listened to that one yet. Red Carpet Rookies. Now that's a podcast I want to give a shout out to. Red Carpet Rookies is very interesting. Guy chats to people from film and TV and stuff. He's spoken to a fair few people from all different disciplines. It's very, very good, like production designers, hair designers, costume designers, writers, editors, producers, production designers, and it's good to get a good clear picture, because that's one of the things that I really like about working on set, is when you get to chat to nice people in different departments and they do something that's got nothing to do with what you do, and you learn a lot, just chatting to people about what they do, and you get an idea of what occupies them fully that I haven't even considered.
Yeah, you may find an interest that, I think I might like doing that.
Yeah, or at least you at least have an appreciation. I mean, that would be a good thing to do, I think, like spend a week in every department and just get a feel for what they do and sympathise with their worries and understand what it is they're trying to do better. Because I think sometimes you get these little silos on set and people don't appreciate what other people have to put up with, so they just focus on what they want to do. Or
even have a clue what they do.
Yeah, because makeup being called vanities or whatever, and it's like, fuck that.
Yeah. Yes. Don't do that, people.
I remember working on this job. Actually, it was a job with Ian. We were doing a commercial. It was a night shoot. It was a commercial for Toyota. We made these creature suits, and this guy had showed up in the makeup tent, and we were like, where the car park was. It was like the first tent that you come to was this big marquee where we were doing makeups, and so he popped his head in, and he saw us putting on all the costume, the makeup and stuff. And his question was, does anyone know where the grown-ups are? It's like, fuck you.
Wow.
Because I'm, putting colour on something, that must mean I'm playing, because you see that at school. It's like, okay.
Wow.
Part of the start of a 15-hour shift. I'm like, yeah, cheers, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to walk out of here on your own or be carried out?
Yeah, it wasn't nice. But it's one of those things, I think this is the thing, and again, this is one of the motivations for us, I think, to do this podcast, is to champion those things that happen in this industry that are mostly hidden, because you don't see them on set, because all the making stuff and all that graft happens away from the studio. That happens in a workshop in advance, and so you show up with this thing, and there are times where I've had people, one occasion, somebody said, oh, those things, they just come out of molds, don't they? I was like, yes. Where the fuck do you think the molds come from? And I'm not saying, that putting on a rubber nose is the same as curing cancer, because it's not. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying, if you think it's just showing up and dancing around with a powder brush. But anyway, you know it, I know it. Hopefully the people listening know it. Thanks very much for listening. Cheers, mate. Speak to you later.
All right, later.
Bye.
Bye.
You can get in touch through our Facebook page or email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com. Check the show notes for more information. If you enjoyed this episode, tell someone else and help us grow by sharing it on social media. Thanks for listening.